What's up? Hey, hello, everyone. Wow. So today we are back going to be talking about Survivor Winners at War, the penultimate episode. So episode 12 and a 2 hour long episode as well. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa, and this episode was interesting because I feel like normally they try to do like 2 hour episodes and put them together like thematically in a way that makes sense. And I feel like this didn't really thematically make sense at all. Like,
I guess, yeah, a 2 hour episode of Nick's downfall. Pretty much. It's sort of sad to think that I guess yesterday literally felt like February 12th and the season was airing and now it's over. And what are we going to do with our lives, Alyssa?
I don't know because we don't even know like what's going to happen in the future because COVID. So this might be the last season of Survivor ever.
Until 2021, we could literally have like 8-9 months off of Survivor. We're going to have a long off season because it does not look like they're actually going to send season 41 out next week, because the plan was, after pushing back 41, that they would start after the reunion show for next week, but I don't think that is happening.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So,
Sad. So this is going to be a bittersweet ending of Survivor. Even though it was a 2-week long episode this week, somehow we still had 10 minutes of recap at the end of this episode. Rob Sesternino had such a funny tweet, like, the 10-minute recap would have been amazing for the people who just somehow missed the first 12 weeks of this show and watched this 2-hour episode only, and then got to see it. I was like, we've seen all of this already. Like, what?
Rachel and I were texting because it was like 8:30 and they were going to the first tribal, and we were like, is something crazy going to happen at tribal? Is the second half going to be like super crazy? And then it got to be like 9:30 and the second tribal was happening, and we were like, are they going to go to rocks or something? Like, what is happening? And then it was just, we thought we had it. We were like, oh, they're going to do the edge challenge to get back from the edge at the end of this week instead of the beginning of next week. That's so smart. And then they didn't.
Yeah, I think, like, if next week the finale doesn't go over, then okay, it's fine. We get the recap over with this week, so it doesn't waste time next week and there's no recap. But I don't know. I feel like you still have to do the recap next week because maybe people didn't finish the whole 2-hour episode this week. I think you still have to stick a recap at the beginning. So people that are saying we're saving time for the finale will get more finale content. I don't know. I think we'll see next week, but I personally don't think that's 100% true. Personally, I feel like instead of 10 minutes of recap what we've seen, it would have been cool to see maybe some never before seen clips, like Tyson and Parvati just did an Instagram live where they talked all about peanut butter and all of the clips that weren't shown yet and all of their peanut butter, like, cool things that they've been doing. We could have seen some of that. Maybe we could have seen some more camp life clips, because like the Denise tattoo clip was cool. Tony and Jeremy fighting over the number of days in the week was cool. Like, I don't know. I feel like we could have seen cool clips like that rather than a recap of stuff we've literally seen.
Yeah, and like some of the content from The Edge was really cool. Like they had a secret scene where Tyson was comforting Sophie because Sophie was really down on herself about like getting out. And so it's like there's so many better things we could have seen than just literally recycled footage. And I feel like I kept watching and kept watching, expecting something like cool or interesting to pop up. But no, no.
Yeah, so if next week, I hope they sort of save time by doing this week, so then we can get more finale footage, but I don't think that's happening because I think you still have to put a recap at the beginning of the finale just in case people clicked off the episode once they saw a recap happening last week.
Yeah. And I think also the recap this week didn't really give you and this is why they deserve to win. And I feel like a lot of times the finale recaps are like, this is what so and so has done that would make them a good winner. Like they try to convince you that everyone has an equal shot of winning, which is hilarious. But yeah.
So, speaking of recaps, we are going to recap this episode of Survivor, and then at the end, we'll be going into our final 6 predictions and winner predictions. So, definitely stay tuned till the end of this podcast to hear our predictions for finale night in a week. So, I think a major theme that we saw throughout this 2-hour episode of Survivor was that nobody was willing to vote Sarah or Tony out of the game. It was so wild that the second boot that they became the swing vote on a final 6 vote. Like, holy crap, I think preseason, if you said that Sarah and Tony were going to be the swing vote at final 6, people would be like, you are bat S-word crazy, because that is never going to happen. So I think like huge kudos to Sarah and Tony, their social game. Somehow they are tricking everyone like Denise and Ben into thinking they're all going to final tribal council together, that nobody is willing to vote them out. And then they vote out the people that are willing to turn on them and vote them out, like Nick, like Kim, and stuff like that. I think it's so wild.
It's so wild, but it's also just like you want to throttle the people who are like helping them this whole time because like I think I mentioned last week, there's almost no situation where Sarah beats Tony. And the fact that Sarah is so convinced that she's going to beat Tony just like blows my mind. Because there was I'm going all out of order, but there's like a scene where Michelle tries to convince Sarah that, like, yeah, if you sit with Tony, you're not going to win. And Sarah's like, psh, whatever. And like she honestly thinks that she's gonna win over Tony. And like it boggles my mind that Ben, Sarah, and Tony are all so convinced they can beat each other, they're willing to like make a final 3 pact. Because the whole
Yeah.
thing with the final 3 pact is you're saying to these people, actually, I think I can beat you, which is like so wild to me.
Yeah, I think Sarah maybe makes a little bit of sense because her and Tony are friends in real life, and she has the personality like, go against the best. I want this to be a war at Final Tribal Council. And she has a bunch of confessionals saying that. And so maybe like Alyssa and I have talked about in previous podcasts, that Sarah is willing to go to the end with Tony because it's like, okay, best of the best, second 2-time winner ever. If I lose to you, that's still like good because I'm in final 3. But if I win to you, it can be like, oh, we're friends in real life, but I beat you in the game. So sort of like a bragging right, maybe, because they are so close in real life. The real like mind-boggling thing is Ben that's willing to go to final 3 with them. Like, I don't know. Something must be in the water there, because I think Ben wanting to go to final 3 with Sarah and Tony, I don't necessarily see the logic behind that. Maybe Ben is, yeah, I don't know, because like even the argument that Sarah and Tony are big threats, I don't think Ben can win against them. And maybe Ben is just thinking like, oh, so Sarah and Tony are promising me final 3. I'd rather get to the end at final 3 rather than being voted out 4th, 5th, 6th and not making it to the end, because the paycheck making it to final 3 versus final 4, final 5 is a lot bigger. And so I think that would honestly be like the logical explanation, that Ben is willing to go to the end with Sarah and Tony because it's a 100% guarantee that they would all bring each other to the end, versus flipping with like Denise or Michelle and Nick. It's not a 100% guarantee. So maybe he wants that paycheck versus getting 4th, 5th, 6th. But I'm like, why the heck are you going to the end with them?
The thing is with Ben, like earlier this season, we saw a lot of people wanting Ben to go home. So like it makes more sense that he would want that security because his name came up a lot. And it's like, yeah. But it's like I feel like you see this perfectly in Nick's case, where like Nick votes for Ben instead of Jeremy, and
It's
just
like,
like this
oh,
entire episode My brain was melting out of my ears with how badly Nick played. So
Yeah, I think Nick voting for Ben and not Jeremy, or Nick not voting Ben and voting Jeremy in that first boot was honestly part of his downfall. Low key, I think Michelle and Nick were probably screwed ever since they lost the challenge right before the merge and they had to vote out Yule, because I honestly think if Yule was still in the game and someone else went home at that point in time, then Yule could have connected Nick and Wendell and then back to Sophie, because it seems like Wendell got voted out because Sophie wanted to avenge Yule getting voted out. And then I think second major problem is when they voted out Adam, because I think Adam was someone that was willing to, he wanted to vote Sarah out and break up that threesome, which now no one is willing to break up the threesome of Sarah, Tony, and Ben. And so like you should have kept those underling people that were on the bottom to use against the big threesome, but nobody wants to vote them out, which I think definitely is a testament to Tony and Sarah's social game, that somehow they have tricked all of these people into thinking they're number one. So, but Nick voting Jeremy out, I think that was a bad move for the start of this episode, because if he voted Ben out, you could have split up the Ben, Sarah, Tony threesome. You vote Ben out with an idol, which we're at final 6 next week once the person with Edge once a person from the Edge comes back into the game, and you have 2 people with idols, maybe 3 people with idols at a final 6, and only 2 tribals to vote 3 people out with idols. Like, it's literally not going to work. So keeping Ben in the game with an idol, everyone knows Tony has an idol because of last tribal council. It's like, I think Nick should have flopped, and then at least you have Jeremy, you have Michelle, you have Nick, and then you can verse maybe Sarah and Tony, and you can have a 3-2. Denise, who knows where she's at? She seems like she's all on board with the Sarah, Tony, Ben threesome, which is wild as well. But Sarah and Tony and Ben are literally doing their work to keep all of these people somehow thinking they're going to the end. And well, I don't know why you would go to the end with Tony.
except for Michelle, and I feel so bad for Michelle this entire episode because she like gives it to Nick and she's like, that was a dumb move. And I feel like she's the only one still like actually legitimately playing with the intent of winning, because I feel like you cannot say that anyone who wants to go to the final 3 with Tony is playing with the intent of winning, except for maybe Sarah. And that's still questionable because I don't think
Yeah.
Sarah will win over Tony. But I
And
feel so bad because Michelle is trying so hard, and like,
And maybe Denise is thinking that her voting out the queen is such a big rhetoric that that will literally carry her entire game at Final Tribal Council. But I don't know, even if you don't have complete information and you don't see what Tony and Sarah are doing on the island right now, I don't think that you can rely your entire Final Tribal Council speech on one move that you made throughout the game, no matter how big it is. And it was pre-merge, even though everyone did talk about it. I don't know. I just think maybe that's some faulty thinking if Denise is thinking that she's going to win at the end just because she voted out Sandra. And maybe Nick voted out Jeremy because Jeremy is a big jury threat and everyone seems to like Jeremy. But I don't know. I think he kept Ben because he thought Ben was a goat and he wanted to go to the end with Ben, and he was trying to get closer to Ben, like we saw last week when Nick told Ben that he was willing to vote Jeremy out in order to show loyalty to Ben. So I think there's something going on there that we aren't seeing, but I don't know. If Jeremy was saved this round again, then I think maybe Michelle, Nick, and Jeremy could have come together to do an uprising.
the thing is, like, shoot, I just forgot what I was going to say.
Something.
Oh yeah, I think Denise has more on her resume than just voting out Sandra, because she was the oldest woman on the island, correct? And she
Yeah.
won 2 individual immunities, 3,
Yeah.
2.
That's
She won
rocking.
2 individual immunities, which is awesome. And I think also she could make the argument that like she was doing some of the social pushing for Tony, Sarah, Ben, because it's like they're the godfathers and she's like the little mafioso who's like taking orders from them but also the one actually making things happen. And so I think if Denise argued it right, she could maybe get a vote or two. But yeah, I think it would be bad to just coast on the I voted out Sandra thing, but I think she does have more to her resume than just that if she wants to play it that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think also Michelle is sort of up and coming this episode, at least. It was interesting because I saw some statistics that Michelle has only voted correctly 6 out of the 12 tribal councils that she went to, versus Tony has voted correctly in all but one tribal council, which was the Sandra vote out, and Ben has voted correctly in 10 of the 11 tribal councils. So I wonder, if Michelle does make it to the end, that could be a definite big tick against her, because 6 out of the 12, we heard it this episode with a Tony confessional just saying that Michelle, she doesn't really know what she's doing. She's sort of just coasting, going along with the flow. And I think voting incorrectly at tribal council definitely shows that to the jury and the people still in the game. I think it was smart at the first tribal council that Michelle does play the coin on herself. Some people were giving her slack on the internet, like she should have played it for Jeremy. But if Nick isn't flipping and the votes are still a 4-2-2, then 2-2 split. If Michelle gave the coin to Jeremy, he flips it safe on the 4 votes, then a revote, Michelle would go home. So she effectively just voted herself out of the game. So it's like you can't give her slack for not playing it for herself because it's a split vote that way. Maybe if she knew Nick was with them 100% and it was a 3 Ben, 3 Jeremy, 2 Michelle, then maybe Michelle can give Jeremy the coin and then Jeremy can flip it. But then Ben has the idol, then Ben would probably play the idol because he maybe got hint of it. So then you're still screwed. So either way, Michelle probably should have kept it for herself, or instead of voting Ben, they should have flipped the vote onto Sarah and then you vote Sarah out. But then maybe Tony or Ben plays the idol for Sarah. The threesome is just literally so stacked with advantages. So so good for them because they can steamroll pretty much now.
Yeah, and I think also the thing with voting incorrectly being a sign of not being in touch with the game, I feel like that's not true. I feel like it shows that Michelle kept trying to make moves against Tony and could not succeed. Or Tony's alliance, I guess you could say. And so I think you could argue that she doesn't have very good social capital, but I don't think that you can argue that she's not strategizing or that she's not in touch with the game. She's still trying to do things. And I think that sometimes with the minority, you get frustrated because it seems like at a point they just sit down and die. But it's Michelle was trying really hard, and there were some points where if someone else had made a different decision, she would have definitely come out on top. And I feel like the fact that a lot of the people who are refusing to go along with Michelle's plan and then earlier Kim's plan, they either got voted out themselves, a la Jeremy, or they aren't going to end up winning. So it's kind of, you know,
Yeah, I think you could definitely say being left out of the votes, it really depends on perception, because I think you could argue, like I was saying, how people would think you're not in touch with the game, or you don't know what you're doing, or like Alyssa was saying, that you were trying to do stuff and it just never worked and you didn't have the social capital. So I think it depends on what the jury views like Michelle not being on the right side of the votes as. Like us as an audience, we know that Michelle is trying and she's not just like being a goat or going along with people's plans, but at least she's trying to make stuff happen, sort of like Kim was trying to make stuff happen and just never worked out in her favor because other people weren't willing to go along with it. And maybe you could say that's a tick against you, because if you don't have the social capital, then like how can you win the game if you can't persuade people to even vote for with you? How can you persuade people to vote for you? And so I think it really depends how you argue why you are on the wrong side of the vote so many times.
Yeah, and I think if you can argue, everyone who should have came with me and instead went with Tony ended up voted out, I think that argument could be really powerful as long as you made it in a way that was palatable to the jury, because you don't want to blame people for getting voted out, but you could say something to the effect of like, I saw the way that Tony was manipulating and trying to run this game, and you guys didn't see it, which is why you're over there and I'm over here. But I still don't think that would be a winning strategy. But again, I could see her getting like a vote or two votes based on that, especially because I think the thing with Michelle is that she has friends on the jury, and like I think the jury will respect Tony's game, but I don't think any of them really count themselves as like his friends. So
Yeah, I think it would be interesting if I think both Alyssa and I are in agreement that finale night, if anyone is sitting with Tony at Final Tribal Council, Tony is winning. There's nothing that you can argue. So, like, if Michelle and Tony are at Final Tribal Council, Michelle can't say, oh, I was on the wrong side of the vote 6 times when you're sitting next to someone who is only on the wrong side of the votes once. And that's because Denise played that double idol trick. I just don't think that kind of argument would work. But maybe if you're sitting next to other people, or if Michelle somehow gets people to go and vote Tony out, then you can say like, oh, I was on the wrong side of the vote so many times because no one was willing to vote Tony out. And then finally it worked. And so therefore I was just waiting for the right time. But then I don't know. I just think if you're constantly voting on the wrong side of the numbers, someone can easily say like, you didn't have the social capital. So like, that's part of the game.
yeah, and I think you could also argue that if you're Michelle, you can argue I didn't have social capital because I was a really recent winner and I didn't play more than once. And I think that like when a lot of the people on the edge are people with like pre-jury attachments or pre-game attachments, pre-game alliances, if you say like I still managed to get this far without having anyone who had my back as a pre-game alliance, I think that could also be really powerful. But yeah,
So we
when we talk about who's going to be the winner, I think it's pretty obvious who Rachel and I think is going to end up winning this season.
Yeah, honestly, any talk about the winner is probably useless. But this episode, we also see Michelle being a total savage on Nick and Sarah. Michelle is the person with the right read. She approaches Nick and says like, or Nick approaches her, and then Michelle says, oh, you had the balls to approach me, like that's great. So that was a fun line. And so Michelle is totally correct, telling Nick like, what is our path to the end? You voted out Jeremy, we have no path to the end. And then, like Alyssa already mentioned, Michelle also goes up to Sarah and then is like, Sarah, you can't win against Tony. And then neither of them want to listen, and both are like, nuh-uh. And then Sarah goes back and tells the entire rest of the tribe what Michelle says, which is good for loyalty for Sarah, which like, okay, Michelle can't go and try to spread rumors like, oh, Sarah's going to flip, let's vote her out, because Sarah told the truth and she told everyone else. But as a viewer, knowing that Tony is probably winning this game, Sarah telling the rest of them and not believing Michelle, and Nick not believing Michelle, is like such a facepalm moment. I'm like, oh my God, these people cannot see. But I guess we have a lot more information, but it was just hard to watch.
Yeah, I feel like this was very much like in Ghost Island when you saw like Dom and Wendell basically dragging Laurel to the end. And like every time Laurel had a chance to vote one of them out, she was like, I don't think it's the right time. Like it felt very much like that, where you know that basically she's marching to her own death. So
Yeah, getting cock blocked every time, I guess. I don't know. There was a funny meme on Reddit that I sent to you. It was like Laurel and Ben photoshopped together, and it's like, oh, it's hard to tell the difference between these two, which it seems like low key that's happening. Us as a viewer clearly can see that Tony is probably winning the game. The people on the island don't necessarily see that, which, like we've mentioned, definitely shows how good of a game Tony is playing, that nobody wants to vote him out when they know he has an idol.
yeah, but it is what it is. The one time I had hope this episode was when Nick got the advantage from the edge that gives him the chance to give someone else a disadvantage in the immunity challenge. Because for the first like 3 votes after the merge, it seemed like Tony was the target and Tony kept getting immunity, so they couldn't vote out Tony. And then once Tony no longer had immunity, like the momentum to try and vote him out was gone. And I was like, okay, maybe they can like create some havoc with this. Maybe Rachel and I were texting when he got this, and we were like, Ben is totally the kind of person who would be hot headed enough to like kind of blow up his
Yeah.
own game after this if he like thought that someone else on the island played the disadvantage on him. Like that would have been
Yeah, I honestly think this 2-episode arc was so funny because Nick paying 8 coins for this disadvantage advantage inadvertently votes himself off of the island because putting it on someone, putting it on Ben because it looked like maybe Ben was close, but putting it on anyone low-key helps Michelle to win the challenge, and maybe Michelle wins without someone being disadvantaged, but with Nick and Michelle being in the final two, or being on the bottom, and we see that they're on the bottom, maybe Nick doesn't get that they're on the bottom and going to be next picked off. One of them winning immunity is like death for the other because then obviously the other person is going home. Personally, I'm not really sure. Like, was this disadvantage really an advantage? I personally think that this disadvantage was sort of useless. Like, okay, you can handicap someone for the immunity challenge, but that's only 1 out of 6 people. And it doesn't really help you because then Michelle and Nick are still in the minority no matter like who wins individual immunity. Like maybe it was good when maybe a few votes ago when Kim was trying to get Tony out and everyone seemed to be on board, and then you put it on Tony and then he doesn't win the immunity, so then you have the momentum, like Alyssa was saying, to vote someone like Tony out. But it seems like in this case it was just sort of useless because even though Michelle won and Ben was disadvantaged, like they were still on the bottom and no one was willing to flip.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been better if or if Nick, instead of being able to give the disadvantage to Ben, had gotten an advantage for himself. Because it's kind of like when you have immunity, you're able to play a little bit harder because you know that like nothing you do will be able to come back on you. And so it's like, I don't know. Nick and Michelle, like you said, they were on the bottom, and Michelle having immunity didn't really seem to give her any leverage. But it's like, yeah, it's hard when it gets to this point in the season where everyone's kind of like dug their heels in and decided what they're going to do or not do. So,
Yeah, I think playing the disadvantage on Ben makes a lot of sense. I think you have to put it either on Ben or Tony. Ben probably more likely to blow up his game, and maybe that opens the game up, which would have been so cool to see if that actually happens because Ben did seem like he was bothered by it. He brought it up at the end of the immunity challenge, and then he also brought it up at tribal council. But I was thinking about it. It's really hard to make up some kind of lie, or like, how do you keep mentioning it to Ben to make him blow up? Because obviously it's either coming from the edge of extinction, which then, oh, it doesn't matter who sent it to you, it's just the jury. And then maybe you take note in that, like, oh, Ben is getting disadvantaged from the edge. Maybe we should bring him to final tribal because people don't like him. He even mentions that he hasn't gotten any fire tokens from anyone, and everyone else, I think, has gotten fire tokens from someone at least. Maybe besides Tony has been gifted fire tokens, but everyone else has been bequeathed fire tokens and Ben hasn't. So I think that goes to show that like maybe the jury doesn't like Ben. Let's take him to final tribal council. But I think to create a lie that, oh, I don't know, Tony put this disadvantage on you, it's so easily fact checkable that Ben can go up to Tony and be like, yo, did you put this disadvantage on me? Tony can be like, no. And it's like, Ben and Tony and Sarah are so close that none of them would probably put the disadvantage on the other one, that it would obviously be Nick or Michelle if it did come from the island that put the disadvantage on Ben. So there's not really any, like, I guess, social, I don't know, like you can't manipulate Ben with this disadvantage because it's not something that you can use to manipulate to blow up the game, I think.
yeah, I think maybe it could have worked if you had implied that like Denise had done it because Denise is outside of their like inner circle. But even then, that would just move Ben, Tony, and Sarah onto Denise. which like gets Nick and Michelle one more vote, but it doesn't break up their threesome. So it's like, yeah.
A lose-lose situation, it seems. It definitely, like, Michelle and Nick are sort of screwed after Jeremy gets voted out, and probably they were screwed before that even because of the numbers dwindling. We also learn after the immunity challenge that fire tokens expire this episode, so I don't know. It seems like Jeff was so big on, oh, fire tokens are changing the game, but like, I don't know, what was the point? Denise had so many and she just had to spend them on, like, she could have bought a tarp and we see her buy rice, but it's like, what was actually the point of them?
Yeah, it seems kind of weird because it's like the people on the edge get to choose who even gets the chance to buy an advantage, and that just seems kind of like questionable to me because I feel like it should be everyone has the opportunity to buy an advantage, but then like it would be cool if it was like a survivor auction type thing where every week one advantage was available and you kind of just like whoever pays the most gets it.
Yeah, I think that
So
would have been interesting. Like, okay, each thing gets delivered to Tree Mail each day or 3 days whenever things go for sale, and then you can maybe barter and go with your alliance to get X amount of coins to buy the thing off of Tree Mail like that. But yeah, I don't know. I just think there's some kind of flaw with the fire tokens. So many people have talked about how being voted out earlier is actually an advantage if you're on the edge trying to collect fire tokens to get back in the game, because like Nick just voted out, he has 0 chances to get an advantage back into the game because he lasted longer in the actual game. So I don't
and
really
like we see
know.
Natalie literally has like 2 handfuls of fire tokens because she's been there from the beginning.
Yeah, so like something is inherently flawed with the fire tokens and Edge of Extinction. Is above our pay grade to figure it out. I just think they need to figure it out before the next time they try to do this.
Yeah. Are they trying to do fire tokens again with 41? Like, do we know that?
I think they're doing fire tokens like forever, is what I was understanding. Like it's like actually a new part of the game.
Well, anyways, Denise uses her fire tokens to buy rice. Um, I don't know. She like faked discouraged. She was like, "Oh yeah, I know I'm getting voted out. I just want to get voted out with a big meal in my stomach." And like, if I was Nick and Michelle, I'd be like, "Bitch, please." Like, I'm not sure how much Nick and Michelle actually bought her whole act because it seemed really fake to me. But I don't know whether that was just because I already knew that Denise was faking or what. So, what do you
I feel
think?
like I was on the other end of the spectrum. I wrote down in my notes that I almost thought that Denise faked it too well, that the people on the jury at Tribal Council, their reactions sort of seemed like they were believing that Denise was just kneeling down and dying until Adam was like, "Oh, is she faking it?" And so good read on Adam for figuring that out, but I don't know. Based off of my perceptions of the jury's facial reactions, I was thinking that they believed it, but like that's a very convoluted way to get to some answer that I think in my brain, which we don't really know what's in their brains.
Yeah, and it just seemed like that's really all I had about it. Just heavy sighing. Because it's like, after Michelle totally dressed down Nick for like, oh, we have no path to the end now, I could not see a way that Nick and Michelle both ended up in the final 5. Just because I feel like they wouldn't have shown Michelle telling Nick like, oh, we're definitely not going to make it to the end if that wasn't relevant. And since Michelle had the immunity necklace, I like knew that Nick was being voted out. So I don't know. I guess, like you
Yeah.
said, the jury sees something different than we do, but also, I'm sure
Yeah,
as soon as Nick gets back, he can be like, oh, yeah, she must have been faking it or whatever.
I think like as a viewer, we know that once Michelle won immunity, it was low key a death knell for Nick being both on the bottom, like you're going to vote the other person out. There was maybe some, oh, we are going to vote Denise out because of Tony's spy nest, which thank God it came up again because I was so sad last week when it only came up once. And so Tony overhears Denise talking to Sarah and Ben, where Denise says that they need to vote out Tony because Tony is going to win the game. And then Sarah and Ben once again are like, nah, but also, to Denise's face. So Denise, Ben, and Nick seem like they're on the chopping block, but it was probably going to be Nick. I think voting out Nick is the smart move because Tony knows and Sarah knows and Nick and Ben knows and Denise knows, I guess. They all somehow know that Nick and Michelle are closer than if you voted out Denise, than Denise and Michelle, that at a final 6 when the edge person comes back, it's less likely that Denise and Michelle will pair up and work with the edge person to vote out Sarah, Ben, Tony next week than if you have to vote Nick out here. Otherwise, Nick, Michelle, and the edge person are more likely to team up together.
Yeah, like it all made so much sense, but it also was so frustrating.
Yeah, like as a viewer, it was just hard to watch because we're like banging our head against the wall. Why can no one see that Tony is so running the game, which is so great to see. Like Tony is literally dominating the game. He is playing everyone. He is running laps around people. Like he is doing an amazing, amazing job. So like hella kudos for that. I just think as a viewer, and we're always like, as a viewer, you can never be happy because you're thinking like, oh, Tony dominating? Every viewer should be so freaking happy that Tony is dominating the game and he hasn't been voted out at a final 6 come finale night. But it seems like everyone is complaining that all the people on the island are not seeing that Tony is dominating the game. So it's such a catch-22, which it's like, oh, can we appreciate that Tony is doing so well in this game? But also people are dragging everyone else like they're not seeing. But then it's also like Tony's doing so well that he's tricking everyone else into not seeing that Tony is doing so well. And like, you can never please everyone.
Yeah, I feel like my ideal season of Survivor, like the winner is really good at Survivor, but they also have someone who's also really good at Survivor opposing them. And so it's like that's when you get the best like final tribals, when 2 people on the final tribal like genuinely deserve to win. So
Yeah. It just seems like people are dragging the end game of this season because the winner is sort of obvious. And after Tony's extortion episode, it seems sort of obvious. And now it's like low-key cemented considering we're going into final tribal council with Tony having an idol, Ben, his partner, also having an idol, and they can probably win some immunities here and there. And so it sort of seems cemented that Tony is going to win the game, which people have some qualms about because it is a boring end to the season. But I think you just have to appreciate, like, this is season 40. We have never seen some of these people play in for like 20 years, and you're going to rag on Tony for dominating the game that no one else can see that he's dominating. I think your priorities maybe aren't in the right spot. I think we should appreciate that, like, Tony's doing so well at the game that he has fooled everyone into thinking that he is like an idiot and not playing the game. So I think even though it will be maybe a less interesting final tribal council because if Tony's in the final 3, he's probably going to win the game, but I don't think you can say that a final tribal council or finale night with Tony in it is going to be boring because Tony is probably going to have some crazy antics.
like the spy nest, which we saw the return of this week. And
Yeah.
like we were saying last week, I feel like they could have just set up the spy nest this week and then also had it be used this week because they had apparently 10 minutes extra time this week. So
yeah, I just really wished we could have seen someone be a worthy opponent to Tony's game, and maybe that worthy opponent was Kim and Tony got the best of her, and so like that's great, but it just is harder to watch when we sort of know the outcome, and the outcome is going to happen for sure, probably like 95% certain that this outcome is going to happen, and no one is next week is going to be able to form an insurrection against the threesome.
Yeah, so next week is gonna be wild. It's gonna start, I hope, with the Edge Battleback Challenge. And we got to see the state of where everyone is on the Edge Battleback Challenge this week. And that's kind of why I thought they were going to do the Battleback Challenge this week. One thing that I thought was interesting was, I believe in the mid-season Battleback Challenge, the advantages cost 3 tokens, and now apparently they only cost 2, because people with only 2 fire tokens bought an advantage to get back into the game, which I thought was questionable. Like, am I remembering that correctly? Do you remember that?
I know that the advantages for the second battle back is definitely 2 coins for 1 advantage. I don't remember the first one. If anyone can let us know in the comments. I thought it was just 1 coin for 1 advantage, and then 3 coins for a
idol.
3 for
Maybe
the idol
one.
That's why, because Rob and Natalie both had 4 going into the first battle back.
Yeah, and Natalie this time had 14, I believe she said.
Yep.
And so she was able to buy all 3 advantages available to her for 6. And then she also, I guess her idol and Rob's idol that they purchased back mid-season, actually still, like, they would still be able to bring it back with them. So I thought that was interesting. I thought those tokens were just lost. So it was cool that they weren't just lost, because that would kind of wreck the idea of a survivor economy if you can just like flush tokens down the toilet. But then Natalie also buys another idol and gives it to Tyson, and my heart just like oozed out of my chest at that. Like,
yeah, I know. That was such a cute moment. I was like, oh, yes, go Tyson. And I think like that is excellent jury management for Natalie. On the Tyson and Parvati Instagram live, they were talking about how everyone was sharing peanut butter, or the people in the cool crowd were sharing peanut butter, and some people were left out. But like that is some good jury management, buying peanut butter to share with other people and like letting some people in on the secret peanut butter versus not. So I think, Natalie, that is good. And honestly, they probably all bonded out there. And so if she can't win her way back in, she wants Tyson to win his way back in. And then they would have a good chance of having an idol at Final 6. Like, you can probably make it to Final 4, especially if you are Natalie or Tyson, and being so bomb athletic, you can probably win 1 immunity challenge in there to make your way to Fire. So that is some excellent jury management there. I think it was funny, sort of, that like Natalie chose Tyson, and I would love to hear Natalie's reasoning for choosing Tyson at the like after the finale night when she does exit interviews and stuff, because like, why Tyson? Did you just become super close with him out on the island? Was it because he's probably the person with the best chances to make it back in? Like, why not Jeremy or Parvati? Like, you gave it to Tyson was sort of funny.
Yeah, I would also really like to hear Natalie's reasoning with that, but I'm sure that it's like a good reason. But
yeah, so Yul, Wendell, and Parvati also bought advantages, and then Rob has an idol from the first Battle Back Challenge. So honestly, okay, we recap the episode. Alyssa and I are going to talk about our final 6 predictions and winner predictions. If you don't want to be spoiled about who wins their way back from the edge of extinction, log out now, because CBS editors just suck booty hole, and they ruin it for all of us, because in the preview for next week that they posted on YouTube, you can see who won the Battle Back Challenge, because the winner of that challenge is in the background of another immunity challenge that is obviously at a later point in time than the Battle Back Challenge. So through some logic, you can surmise that the person who wins the Battle Back Challenge is that person in the background, which I'm like, you editors, what the heck? Like, you have so many hours of footage. You can literally just use a different 2-second clip there and then not spoil who wins the freaking Edge of Extinction Battle Back Challenge. Like, what the heck?
Yeah. So last warning, if you don't want spoilers, click out now. Okay, we're going to assume that if you wanted to not hear spoilers, you are gone. So the person who wins the Battle Back Challenge is Natalie. And when Rachel and I were talking about this, like, it makes a lot of sense considering, like, she's gotten a lot of Edge screen time beyond just, like, oh, she was the first person at Edge. Like, she's gotten a lot of, I would say, like, personal content. And, like, basically every time she's mentioned by another person, they talk about how much of a challenge beast she is. So I feel like that's basically just like foreshadowing her being able to win her way back into the game. And like, I'm not mad about Natalie winning her way back into the game, but I think last week we said that the person who comes back from Edge could determine whether or not Tony was the winner of this game. And I feel like Natalie being the one to come back from Edge basically cements Tony's place because Natalie isn't really going to have a story. Like her story is going to be I was on Edge for a really long time. I came back and survived through votes. And I deserve to be here because I did that. And like you can't really compare that to Tony's entire resume of like all these votes he orchestrated, all these people he manipulated, like all of the stuff that he had to do to get where he did. So
Yeah, I agree 100%. It makes a lot of sense. Natalie wins her way back in with 3 advantages and eating peanut butter on the island. I agree with you. If Natalie and Tony are in the final 3, you can put Ben or Sarah in there. Doesn't really matter. I think Tony wins. I think Tony wins any combination of this final 6. If Tony is with Michelle or Denise or Sarah or Ben or Natalie, I think Tony wins. I think Natalie can only win this game maybe if she's sitting next to someone like Michelle or Denise or Ben, any combination of those 3 in their final 3, because I think Natalie does have a good story that may outweigh someone like Ben's story if the jury doesn't respect Ben, as we see the jury laughing at him a lot of times. So I think Natalie could have the argument like, oh yeah, I was the first voted out. Like she mentioned on her Edge clip this time, I felt a lot of like pain about it. And I felt very like insecure because like you're the first voted out of an all winner season. But I played the Edge of Extinction game while I was voted out. And you can't fault her because like, yeah, okay, she wasn't in the game, but the Edge of Extinction is part of the game. So like you have to accept it at some point or another. And so I think Natalie could have an argument like, I found 4 out of the 5 advantages on Edge. I was running laps around you all. Like, oh, remember this day I found that clue when Amber, Danny, and Ethan couldn't figure out the advantage clue. Like, I actually found that, and I think she could definitely bring in like got 14 freaking fire tokens. Like, I wasn't on a vacation out there. I was working hard, and she got to hang out with the entire jury, which Denise, Michelle, Tony, Sarah, I don't think has met every single person on the jury, especially the people who were voted out pre-merge. So if some kind of combination of Natalie, Michelle, Ben, Denise make it to a final 3, Natalie could have a compelling argument, I think, to win the game. But also, I don't know, on an all-winners season, having the first boot be the winner is low-key like Chris Underwood 2.0. Even though Chris played an amazing like 9 days of Survivor, Natalie being first to winner, I think might not sit right with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think like you said, Natalie I think has a lot of great relationships with a lot of people on the jury. She obviously has a good relationship with Jeremy, especially because like I would argue that Natalie giving Jeremy the safety without power advantage is the reason he got as far in the game as he did. She got some goodwill from Tyson. She and Parvati seemed really close on the island. I'm sure that there was more people who she was close with who we just didn't see. So like I think if people were voting purely based on like who they liked the best, Natalie would be a shoe-in winner no matter who she was sitting next to. I think her biggest obstacle will be, as you say, being the first person voted out and then going to winner status. So she could
Yeah.
also pull a Tyson and get voted out again. So
Honestly, yeah. I feel like the Natalie conversation feels a little bit circular because I just don't see any scenario really where Tony is going to get voted out in final 6 or final 5, considering that Natalie makes it back in. She has a hidden immunity idol. Ben has a hidden immunity idol. And Tony has a hidden immunity idol. So that's 3 people with idols at a final 6, and you can't use them after final 5. So you have 2 votes and 3 people with idols. The math doesn't really add up there. So either you have to like flush Tony's idol at final 6 and then vote him out at final 5, but Tony can probably win an immunity here or there, and so Natalie will probably be Tony's biggest competition too, getting an immunity, which is good if you want to see Tony get voted out before final tribal council. But I just think we're going to see an advantage get in at final 6 where Michelle or Denise, someone is going to go home just because Tony's safe, Ben's safe, Natalie's technically safe. By association, Sarah can probably be safe if Tony or Ben win immunity. They might play the idol for Sarah. I just see Michelle or Denise going home final 6 because there's just no way that, I don't know. I think Tony can make it through 2 votes because he has an idol and Ben has an idol.
Yeah. So unless Ben wins immunity at final 6 and decides he might be unsafe at final 5, that might be a situation where he doesn't play his idol for Tony. But I feel like there's a very good chance of Tony being able to get to Final Four. And I guess
Yeah.
Final Four is another thing we should talk about because it's possible that whoever wins the final immunity challenge at Final Four knows that Tony is going to be the one to beat and puts him on fire, and he just gets out on fire. So
yeah, I think with the way that the advantages are playing out with 3 people with advantages and only 2 votes left before fire, it's not a lot of wiggle room for these people. If you're Sarah, Ben, Tony, you're totally fine for some reason going to the end with each other. And so I can definitely see their route to the end super clear. I think, yeah, like you're saying, Final Four is probably the biggest obstacle from that threesome getting to the end because I could totally see Natalie winning some immunities here or there. Maybe she wins the final tribal council immunity and she puts like Sarah and Tony up there because those are the 2 people who she thinks are the ones to beat. And maybe Tony goes home, maybe Tony wins. That's probably the biggest wild card of the of finale night because anyone can go to fire and anyone can go home. It was interesting that Ben hasn't been voted out yet because this episode they did mention how good Ben is at fire and he can literally make fire in 2 minutes, it was mentioned, and he won fire on his season and ended up winning the game. I think it would be very sort of like storybook ending if Ben got put up to fire and then he lost this time because a lot of people are sort of angry at the fact that the fire making challenge was just, a random twist at Final Four, and no one knew it was happening until it actually happened, that production sort of helped Ben win. So it would be funny if Ben got out at fire this time.
yeah, I think it's also Final Four can be a real hero moment because it's when in Ghost Island, Dom put himself up for fire for Final Four because he thought that was what he needed in order to be good enough to beat Wendell, and he still lost. And so it's if you need the Final Four to be your hero moment in order to win the game, that's questionable, I guess. I mean, I've said before that I don't think it's fair when people say Ben didn't deserve to win because the Final Four challenge was simply a part of the game. That would be like saying Chris didn't deserve to win because he came back from Edge, or Yul didn't deserve to win because the whole time he had that freaking super idol. So it's
Yeah.
I object to the notion that you don't deserve to win because you play within the parameters of the game given to you. But I do think it could be an interesting parallel to see what happens with the Final Four challenge and whether or not that does some nice bookends for anyone's story.
Yeah, I think me and you are on the same page. Anyone who wins Survivor deserves their win because they play the game. They freaking won the game. Even if you don't think their game was flashy or they deserve the win, like they're $1 million richer, maybe $700,000 richer than the rest of us. And they survived 39 days. So, like, hella kudos to them. I don't know. Final four, like we're just talking, how it's so easy for potentially Tony to go from final six to final tribal council because of the final four fire making challenge is sort of a free pass, if you want to call it that, from 5 to 3. I think you have to get rid of the fire making challenge, or you keep the fire making challenge and then you make it a final two, because I think people being safe from final 5 to final 3 like totally ruins end games of the season. Like they put the final four in there to prevent the winner pick from going home at final four because everyone realizes that they're going to win the game. But I think if you're a good survivor player and maybe the cards just aren't in your favor, but if you deserve to, if you're going to win the game and you deserve to win the game, you can maneuver your way out of a final four being voted out in the robbed goddess kind of position or fallen angel position, whatever you want to call it, because you can maneuver socially around that or win immunity. I just think you can't have fire and then have a final three because there's just too many votes where someone is safe and they can make it to the end of the game too easily. You have to get rid of one or make it a final two. So at least you can have the final three vote be a place where someone can get voted out.
Yeah, because I think when you look at it, Tony won 3 individual immunities. He had access to 2 immunity idols, and then if he also was safe at Final Four for Fire, that's like 6 of the post-merge votes that he was safe at. And so I think that's the kind of thing. I think it's really interesting too how people will pivot their position on whether or not they're pro fire or anti fire based on like who is the one doing the fire competition. Because it's like some people are very, very anti Ben, but then they were like, oh yeah, Dom should have won Ghost Island or something like that. And it's like, I feel like you can either like a twist or dislike a twist, but you cannot, you know?
That's like,
So
yeah, the casual fans, they just bandwagon. The wind told me to like it this season. The wind told me to not like it that season because the outcome wasn't favorable. But I think overall, let us know in the comments down below who you think is going to win Survivor next week. I'm so sad. We're going to have nothing to talk about after next week. But Alyssa and I are on the same page. We think Tony is like 99% winning. It will be a crazy finale if something other than that doesn't happen, which I am all for because that will make it more interesting. I am also all for seeing Tony win this damn thing and be the king of Survivor, the second two-time winner. And that's just so poetic. Him and Sandra being like the king and the queen of Survivor.
yeah, I would say the 1% would be Natalie or possibly Michelle winning. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it'd be Tony probably like 99%, those two maybe a little percent. Sarah, if she's with Ben and someone else on the season, I think Sarah could be second place. And then Natalie can probably win against Ben, Michelle, or Denise. Any of those configurations, but Tony just wins against all of them, so he has the better chance of winning.
Yeah. So, like Rachel said, let us know in the comments down below what you guys think, who's going to win. And also let us know what do you want us to do if we end up having to wait 9 months for our next season of Survivor? Do you want us to look at other reality TV shows? We can do a backlog of some winter seasons. I know watching this season has made me really want to rewatch One World and see Kim Spradlin dominate. Really want to rewatch South Pacific and see Sophie. So let us know in the comments down below. And
Yeah.
we'll see you guys next week for the finale.
Peace out.
Bye.